The phrase golden era is thrown about a lot in boxing these days. I think we like to believe we're either in one or that one is just around the corner. Look at the amount of times that phrase has been applied to the current heavyweight division over the past 5+ years, when for me it's a division that has still to yet really sort itself out. If we look at the heavyweight division of the early to mid 1930s, that was probably worse. The heavyweight title was being passed around almost every few months. Nobody could keep hold of it. It was a bit of a mess. But if we go down in the weight divisions, keep it in the same era, and look at from lightweight to welterweight, you have an absolute triple platinum era that can stand up to anything. 70s heavyweights, the Fabulous Four, whatever you want to name. You had three men who just created a tornado of action during the Great Depression years. Jimmy McLarnon, Barney Ross, and Tony Canzoneri. Now that last guy, Canzoneri, he might not necessarily be the greatest of this unholy trinity, but he might just be the most compelling because of the amount of times he fought, which BoxRec has at about 171, and for his unconventional, almost cocky style of fighting, where he skipped along, hands down, and goaded you into a slugfest. The way he winged his punches, a wide arc, you could mistake him at first glance for being crude, but when you see those shots land with a thump on the counter, you see this guy was a really devious practitioner. He was one of the early guys to win titles at 3 different weights: featherweight, lightweight, and light welterweight. It was probably at lightweight where he was at his best. He was only about 5'5", but he fought much bigger men. And he just fought sheer quality. Benny Bass, Kid Chocolate, Jack Kid Berg, Billy Petroli, as well as the aforementioned other 2 guys. It was just, his resume just has insane depth. And there's the caveat that Canzoneri was almost the first ever 4-weight world champion, because as a teen he went for the bantamweight championship against Bud Taylor. But in the first fight he drew, and then he dropped the decision in the rematch. In 1933, he's already had over 100 fights at this point. He fights Barney Ross. Naturally bigger man. And loses both fights. The first one 10 rounds, the second one 15 rounds. In one or possibly both of them, he drops rounds through fouling. There was a harsh ruling back in the day that if you fouled, they just took the round away from you and gave it to the other guy. Very close fights. But at this point, and Barney Ross was naturally bigger, Canzoneri is probably already past his prime. He is a guy who has already had over 100 fights at this time. But he's only about mid-20s here. The mileage that he clocked up undoubtedly blunted his skills and his ability. You do get fighters who age early. Esteban de Jesus, Wilfred Benitez, it does happen. But with Canzoneri, his sheer mileage must have played a big part. He had his first grueling 15 rounds as a 19-year-old. You look at a Jimmy Wild back in the day down at flyweight. He had a lot of fights, but he was generally blasting people out of there without too much trouble. Canzoneri was having endless 15-round battles with quality opponents, repeated battles, big sagas with loads of guys. He loses his lightweight and junior welterweight titles to the great Barney Ross. But he continues with a schedule pretty much just as hectic and manages to get back his lightweight title off soon-to-be big player Lou Ambers. Floors him, hurts him, and shows some of that old magic again. He's definitely past his best at this point, but he continues and manages to win one off Jimmy McLarnin, again, naturally bigger. But there's a funny little story to this classic fight. And that is that back in the day, they had the microphone that came down to the middle of the ring. And then it was supposed to be pulled up. Well, it remains down when Canzoneri is in the ring just before the fight. He turns round, walks into it, and is actually cut before the fight. The bell goes for round one. Canzoneri's cut, and a punch hasn't been even thrown yet. I'd imagine that could possibly even stop a fight today. But the fight continues, and McLarnin almost knocks Canzoneri out then in the very first round, batters him. Naturally smaller man, has him against the ropes, thudding him with his classic right hand. Once Canzoneri though in the second round, somehow, digging deep, all that ring wisdom, gets his feet back under him and then just starts laying into the bigger man. And ends up winning about 8 of those 10 rounds in what was definitely his last classic victory. The smaller Canzoneri continues to fight bigger men, and in the last year of his career, 1939, he fights 17 times. It's just like he's literally throwing himself into the ring at this point. He eventually gets knocked out against big puncher Al Bummy Davis at a time when Henry Armstrong was now terrorizing those same lower weights. Canzoneri retires from the ring and fails to get into World War II because of problems with his sight. But he manages to go on and becomes part of a comedic duo in Broadway. And then, of course, they didn't just tell jokes, but sometimes for some of the eager audience members, he would regale them with classic fight tales. If you enjoyed that video, I did write a series on that particular era of boxing quite a few years ago now. The link is in the description below.